Everyone is going to help us, so if you can raise your hand, he will take the mic to you and you can ask your question. First of all, let's open this up by asking you guys, and maybe Andy and Del particularly, how did this whole thing come about? Andy, we know, a lot of people in this room know your story. You've been dealing with this subject matter for a good 18, maybe 20 years now. But at what point did you decide you have to get this on film and you have to get it out to a wider audience? What compelled you to do this?
Right, I suppose that, can you hear me? Is it working? Yeah. When my career changed course, I teamed up with Polly Tommy and the Autism Media Channel, and our aim was to make serious documentaries about this issue. And in 2014, Brian Hooker contacted me and said there is an inside source at the CDC who is disclosing the fact that they've concealed data. And Brian had done a wonderful job at unraveling that mystery. We decided to make a documentary. And as it came together, I was at a fundraiser in Los Angeles, and there in the audience was Del Bigtree. Del was a producer from the Doctors TV show, had come there. He came up to me afterwards and he said, Andy, I want to come to Austin. I want to see what you've got. He came to Austin. He looked at what we got. He then gave up his job at the Doctors on the promise of nothing at all. And together we put together this story. So it's been a long time in the making, but I hope you'll agree that it was well worth putting together.
You, of course, had a very successful career as a producer on The Doctors. So when you talk to this guy, Andy Wakefield, what is it that motivated you to give up this job and to pursue this movie?
Well, first of all, it starts with what this story is about. The CDC whistleblower, this incredible data that he's given us. You know, it spent 7 years celebrating the best of what medicine had to offer. It also was known on The Doctors for doing difficult stories, glyphosate, Monsanto, things like that were affecting public health. But when I met Andy and I went down to see this documentary he was working on, looking at the data, looking at these interviews, and looking at what Dr. Thompson was saying, I realized I was looking at the biggest story of my lifetime. When you think as a journalist or a filmmaker, you know, you sort of think about Watergate and you know what took place there, and you kind of wonder, I wonder if a story like that will ever happen in my lifetime. And I realized I was staring at that. I was staring at something so big and scary and daunting. But the truth is I had no choice. How do you walk away from what you just saw? I mean, what this scientist, the most important, you know, vaccine study, the one we've all been pointing to, saying vaccines are safe, and the top scientist involved in crunching the numbers on it comes out and says we're manipulating data in here, we're throwing things out. I guess I'm just surprised that we're the only ones telling this story. I don't know where the news media has been on it. I don't know how they held off for a year, and then when a congressman steps up and takes the same data we're looking at, and we were all in an editing bay the moment that happened, and said, oh my God, look at this, it's happening. You know, Bill Posey's bringing this before the Congress. Certainly now the media will tell this story. We have a real congressman talking about a real CDC whistleblower, a decorated scientist that's at the CDC as we speak. You know, now it's got to be a story. Still no story. You know, as journalists, you know, this isn't a court of law. This is a film. We've made a movie about a very important story. As journalists, as filmmakers, what Andy's been doing all along is asking reasonable, appropriate questions based on what we've been told. That's what this film is doing. I can only, as a filmmaker, Andy, Polly, we can only ask those questions and ask that, you know, the society, our country, look into this matter and ask these same questions of our congressmen, of our government. And then you see the media that's come out against us saying, do not see this movie. Do not, you know, Tribeca, pull this down. I don't think we've ever seen a moment like this, that media is telling people to not see a movie they have not seen themselves. I mean, you know, I thought in order to be a film critic, you had to watch a movie to criticize, you know? But what's really at stake here is massive, is the health of our children, it's the health of our future. But what we've seen over the last week calls into question, you know, if we can't ask these questions, then we really have to question the health of our democracy. And that's what I think we all have to look at.
Polly, we've all seen your story here on screen tonight, and I want to thank you for that, for being brave enough to actually open yourself up. Tell us, how did you initially meet Andy Wakefield?
Oh, well, I met Andy years ago at the beginning of the GMC, and my husband actually suggested that I interviewed him for the Autism File magazine, and I didn't really want to, but he insisted that I did, and that was a long time ago, and time's moved on. And I just want to say, really, that was Billy's story, but there are countless other stories, and they're all very similar. But right now, as I speak, I have a friend whose adult child seizures all day. She stands over this child and she has no idea whether he's going to make it through the seizure. I have another friend whose adult child, smashes his head so violently that his head is so distorted, she doesn't know if he's going to make it. There is nothing pretty about a vaccine-injured child. And this has to stop. And this has to stop now. We cannot harm any more of our precious babies. So out there are more William Thompsons. There are people who know what it's doing to our children, and it has to stop now. They have to do the right thing now. And we have to stop any more children being damaged, and then, now we have to take care of the countless Billies out there that have no future, and psychotropic medicine and 4-point restraints is not the way for our children. This is a serious, serious situation. We are supposed to love one another, not harm one another, and it has to stop now. No money is worth taking the life of a child like Billy. Billy could have had a chance in life to be whatever he could have been, and he doesn't now. He simply doesn't, just like all the other vaccine-damaged children, like Steve, like everything else. It is bleak and it is horrendous, and we have to stop this happening now.
It was your initial conversations with Dr. Thompson at the CDC that really paved the way for this story to be told and for this movie to be made. Ultimately, what was it like for you when you knew that it was going to go public? What was the feedback from Dr. Thompson?
I believe that Dr. Thompson, when he found out that the information was going public, was relieved and actually had a weight lifted off of his shoulders. And one of the things that he told me, and this is not in a conversation that I recorded, was, you know, I'm going to have to go through a few months of agony, granted, but that's nothing compared to the life sentence that children have and families have once their child has gone through a vaccine injury. And it's, you know, it does my heart good to see this information finally get out. The story that the media, even though we went public with the whistleblower story in August of 2014, there was such a media blackout, nobody would touch it. And if they did touch it, they would only touch the fact that I had a paper retracted over this whole issue. That's the only thing that they would touch. But having this movie come forward, and I am not in contact with Dr. Thompson. I think that if he was in contact with me, that would jeopardize his livelihood and his retirement and his family. But in seeing the film, I think that this is a film that Dr. Thompson would be pleased with.
To the audience, I'm sure most of you have been following what happened with Tribeca Film Festival. Certainly, we were disappointed at first when we found out that the film had been removed from the schedule, but I'm curious if any of you have had feedback from people you've talked to about that, and how do you feel about it now?
I can say that, you know, it was a real honor to be selected by Tribeca Film Festival. It's one of the greatest film festivals in the world. To be in communication, have the support of someone as brilliant and wonderful as Robert De Niro was a spectacular moment in time that we enjoyed for, you know, a couple of months. You know, what happened after that, yeah, we will never know. I wasn't in those rooms. I don't know what kind of pressure came down. I don't know where that pressure comes from. We've seen a lot of speculations in the news. But all I can say is that, you know, Robert De Niro is suffering the same life that Polly Tommy is and Brian Hooker. And I know that, you know, I think I speak for all of us, our hearts go out for him and all the fans that have to deal with you know, an autistic child, a vaccine-injured child. And, you know, I think my hopes are that certainly he and his wife and his family recover from this really awful event, and whoever put them up to it. And I hope the Tribeca Film Festival survives, because, you know, a lot of filmmakers have reached out to me and said, I'm never going to submit a film there again. It's a really sad day in film. You know, I left television, I left my job to make a film because this was the only place I thought we'd be allowed to do this anymore. I mean, the sponsors in television now, if you turn on your television and you watch your ad breaks, every single one of them is filled with pharmaceutical ads. You know, I remember 10 years ago, or, you know, a little bit longer, you'd sit in a doctor's office and you'd see the ads running on a screen. But we all now have that box in our house. And it's trying to convince us that we cannot live without pharmaceutical intervention. That's a problem. It's a problem with television. I thought film was about that, and thank God for places like Angelica Film Festival. And other theaters that are reaching out to us, and I look forward to all the great theaters that will still stand up for truth, stand up for, you know, at least allowing us to tell our stories, whatever they may be. It's all about freedom of speech.
Thank you, Joe. When it got pulled, I said to the guys, you know, welcome to my world. It's like the weather, you know, you wait 5 minutes and it can be completely different. And then this happens, and you can't buy the kind of publicity that we got, not that you'd want most of it. But what the sadness for me, I suppose, is that we were never privileged to the who said what organization, what criticisms or comments had been made that led to the decision to pull it. There was no transparency whatsoever, and that lack of due process is such a great shame. It's a great shame for all of us, for filmmakers, for parents, for the entire country. But nonetheless, I agree entirely with Del that my heart goes out to any parent affected by this, particularly when you're up against an organization that is thrusting quasi-science in your face when you have no expertise in that area, and it clearly causes panic. Anyway, we move on. The important thing to note is we will never walk away from this issue. We will never quit. We'll go to our graves fighting this fight because it is worth fighting. Nelson Mandela, at his trial before he was incarcerated in solitary confinement for 27 years, said some ideals are worth dying for. And your children are far more than just ideals, and they're most certainly worth dying for. So we continue.
Let's open it up to the audience. If you have a question, just raise your hand.